In January 1962, in a village in Tanzania, a schoolgirl suddenly started laughing. Then another one. Within a few hours, the whole class was laughing non-stop. The laughter lasted not minutes, but hours. It spread like an infection, from village to village, from school to school. No one could explain what was happening. Not doctors, not teachers, not parents. It was an epidemic without a virus, a disease without a cause. And although it all ended, no one still knows why the whole country laughed. Today, we will tell you about the most mysterious mass hysteria of the 20th century. Tanzania, January 1962. The country has only recently gained independence from British rule. The streets are filled with festive speeches, promises of change, and the air of freedom. But in a small girls' school in the village of Kashasha, something is happening that will soon shake the entire region. It begins as an innocent bout of fun. It ends as a national disaster. One of the students was the first to laugh. She said she felt an inner heat and a strange sensation, as if the world around her had lost its reality. The laughter burst out of her, hysterical, uncontrollable, without reason. Another girl followed suit. Then another. Within a few hours, infectious laughter had spread to almost half the students. The teachers were at a loss. The children couldn't study. Some laughed until they had convulsions and fainted. Some began vomiting, had stomach pains, and couldn't breathe normally. At first, the school administration assumed it was just teenage mischief. Maybe someone had eaten something bad. Maybe it was an emotional outburst. But a day passes, then another, and the attacks continue. The laughter is uncontrollable. The students complain that they cannot sleep, laughing even in their sleep. Some are overcome by panic and tears, mixed with laughter. The teachers close the school and send the girls home. But this is the beginning of a real epidemic. The girls return to their home villages, and there everything repeats itself. Their brothers and sisters start laughing. Then their neighbors. New outbreaks are reported in other schools attended by former Kashashi students. In one of them, in Nyambale, 40 kilometers from the epicenter, more than 90 school children fall ill with laughter. A month later, there are hundreds of infected people. Some report that the attacks last not minutes, but hours. For some, they last for weeks. Local officials are in a panic. They call doctors and write to Dar es Salaam, the country's capital. But the doctors do not understand what is happening. Blood tests, urine tests, neurological tests. Nothing reveals anything. No viruses, poisons, or infections. The children are physically healthy, but they cannot stop laughing. About 6 weeks after the outbreak began in Kashasa, the Tanzanian authorities ordered all schools in the district to be closed. This was an extreme measure. People began to fear their own children. Thus began one of the most mysterious episodes in the history of medicine. An epidemic that left no physical traces, but literally paralyzed the region. There was no virus, but laughter spread like a disease. And that was only the first act of this frightening play. Amid the widespread epidemic, Tanzanian authorities turned to doctors and mental health specialists for help. A group of medical workers, including psychiatrists, arrived from Dar es Salaam. But from the very first attempts at examination, it became clear that traditional approaches were not working here. None of the children show signs of infectious diseases, brain damage, or other organic disorders. Instead, Researchers observe a typical set of symptoms: bouts of compulsive laughter, insomnia, anxiety, and in some cases, temporary memory loss and hallucinations. But none of these signs fit into the framework of classic diagnoses. This is not schizophrenia. This is not epilepsy. This is not manic psychosis. The patients behave normally the rest of the time, can give coherent explanations, and sometimes even stop experiencing symptoms without any medical intervention. The first scientific publications refer to what is happening as a mass psychogenic reaction, or mass hysteria. This is a rare but documented phenomenon in which a group of people begin to experience similar physical or mental symptoms without the presence of a biological agent. Emotions are transmitted from person to person like a virus, but this is a psychological virus. Mass hysteria is not new. Historians point to similar cases: medieval dancing manias in Germany, fainting spells among nuns in France, and children infected with seizures in Venice. But in Tanzania, the scale of the phenomenon is striking. Thousands of cases, many settlements, and all this within a few months. Psychologists suggest that the atmosphere of counterpoint, post-colonial stress, played a special role. The country had only recently gained independence, and the social structure was in a state of restructuring. According to Dr. Larry Peters, an American psychiatrist who studied the case, the epidemic could have been caused by social tension, high levels of anxiety, and the absence of familiar mechanisms for emotional release. Schoolgirls under pressure from strict rules, new school discipline, and a lack of emotional support may have unconsciously expressed their inner tension through uncontrollable laughter. Then the domino effect kicked in. One case triggered a chain reaction. Some researchers compare this to the panic in a crowd effect or mass psychosis in a closed community. Similar cases occur in the army, in religious sects, and even in offices, anywhere where social ties are tight and emotions are suppressed. In Tanzania in the 1990s, it was schools, especially boarding schools. But despite scientific explanations, much remains unclear. Why laughter? Why did the attacks last for weeks? Why did the epidemic spread for tens of kilometers? Why weren't everyone infected? Why only young people? Science does not provide clear answers to all these questions. Mass hysteria is a convenient but vague term. It explains the mechanism, but does not reveal the source. It is as if someone lit a match, but no one saw who was holding the box. To understand why the laughter epidemic occurred in Tanzania, it is important to look deeper into the historical and cultural context of the time. The year 1962 was a moment of transition. The country had just won its independence from the British Empire. There was a new flag, new slogans, and new hopes. But behind the facade of freedom lay the chaos of nation-building. Before that, Tanzania was called Tanganyika. The British administration strictly controlled the education system and introduced European norms of behavior and management. After independence, power passed to new leaders, but the old structures, schools, hospitals, administration remained the same in spirit. An atmosphere of strict discipline and hidden fear hung over everything. This was especially true in rural schools, where children from peasant families were subjected to authoritarian, essentially colonial methods of education. It was in these schools that the epidemic began. Most of those infected were teenage girls. They were particularly vulnerable. They were under triple pressure: age-related stress, social subordination, and the breakdown of cultural traditions. The girls lived far from their families, in boarding schools, under constant supervision, in a system where any display of emotion was considered a breach of discipline. They had to study, obey, and remain silent. But beneath this outward calm, tension was building, and at some point, it erupted. At the same time, Tanzania was searching for its identity. Colonial propaganda had destroyed traditional beliefs, but offered nothing in return except abstract progress. Catholic and Protestant missions, secular schools, conflicting ideals, all this created a spiritual void. And in such a void, phobias, panic, and irrational outbursts easily arise. The influence of economic conditions should not be forgotten either. Most villages remained poor. Children suffered from malnutrition, lack of medicine, and hard domestic work. Stress accumulated over the years, and when one girl laughed in Kashasha, she may have triggered not just a psychogenic chain reaction. She may have activated a collective unconscious accumulated over generations. In this context, laughter becomes not joy, but a cry. It is a form of protest, a form of escape, a form of unconscious revenge. The girls could not strike at the system, but they could break it from within. Paralyze schools, make officials lose their bearings, make the whole world pay attention. Interestingly, it is precisely this aspect, the social aspect, that Western doctors often ignored. For them, it was an anomaly. For the residents of Tanzania themselves, it was a symptom of a deeper illness, the illness of the rift between the old and the new, between oppression and freedom, between the body and power. The laughter epidemic could not have happened in a vacuum. It was born at the intersection of historical tension, cultural trauma, and invisible but real pain. The most frightening thing about the laughter epidemic is not the statistics or medical reports. The most frightening thing is the poids, living memories of those who were inside this nightmare. We have heard a few such stories. Some of the testimonies were recorded by researchers, some were recorded years later in interviews. But each of them sounds as if the person went through something irrational, almost otherworldly. One of the former students of the Kashasha school said, "It started suddenly. We were laughing and couldn't stop. I felt like I was losing control of my body. I laughed until I started crying. I didn't understand what was happening. I was scared. I was afraid I would die from laughing." A teacher from a school in Nyambule recalled how once during a lesson, the whole room was engulfed in a wave of laughter. They were laughing without even looking at each other. Some were convulsing. One boy was laughing and hitting himself in the face as if he wanted to stop. We tried to take them away, but we got infected ourselves. I started laughing and couldn't speak. All I remember is the taste of tears. Some accounts mention episodes of hallucinations. One girl claimed to have seen fire on the floor, while another schoolboy said he felt the walls shaking. Some described voices in their heads, telling them not to be afraid and to laugh. Some parents who observed their children claimed that the laughter sometimes sounded unnatural, as if it were not their voices. Local elders in some villages believed that this was the work of evil spirits, released through someone's fault. People gathered for night prayers, burned herbs, and made sacrifices. But most often, they just waited, helpless, without explanation. Interestingly, according to many eyewitnesses, after the epidemic ended, the children remembered almost nothing. Only fragments, vague images. Some felt ashamed, others did not want to talk about it at all. It was as if it had not happened to them. These voices are an integral part of history. They give the epidemic a more human face. Without them, it could all be dismissed as a medical curiosity. But through their stories, we can see that this was real suffering, even if it looked like laughter. When science cannot provide a clear answer, a vacuum arises. And nature abhors a vacuum, especially human nature. Alternative explanations quickly began to emerge around the laughter epidemic in Tanzania, many of them openly mystical, some eerily plausible. The first and most widespread version among the local population was spirit intervention. In African cultures, laughter can be not only an expression of joy, but also a sign of possession. In some areas, it was believed that schools had become an arena for a struggle between ancestral spirits and the Western education system imposed by the colonizers. In this logic, laughter is a form of invasion, a way for spirits to show their presence. Purification ceremonies were held in villages, shamans were summoned, and herbs and symbolic objects were burned. Others saw the epidemic as punishment for betraying traditions. Girls in schools no longer followed rituals, did not wear traditional clothing, studied foreign languages, and white subjects. This caused alarm among the older generation, and when the fits of laughter began, many saw it as a sign. The system that had torn children away from their roots had itself caused a backlash. But there were also darker hypotheses. In the early 2000s, conspiracy theory forums began to suggest that the outbreak in Tanzania could have been part of a petit tournant, secret mind control experiment. Allegedly, in the 1960s, unofficial programs involving psychotropic substances, hypnosis, and radio waves were conducted in some African countries. This brings to mind parallels with a CIA project called MK-Ultra, in which American Special Services did indeed test LSD and methods of mind control on unsuspecting people. No direct evidence has been found that Tanzania was the scene of such experiments. But proponents of this version point to the strange selectivity of the epidemic. Only children, only schools, the absence of an infectious agent, and the speed of its spread. They wonder, could a group of children have been subjected to psychological manipulation through food, air, or even auditory stimulation? Another theory is religious apocalyptic. Some Christian and Islamic groups in the region interpreted the epidemic as a sign. Laughter was perceived as the antithesis of prayer, as a manifestation of demonic influence. People turned en masse to spiritual leaders, seeking explanations in sacred texts. Some believed it was a warning of the imminent end of the world. It is curious that the participants themselves rarely supported these theories. Those who survived the attacks spoke more often not about the devil or the secret services, but about fear, about the fact that no one listened, no one helped. It was as if the laughter was not from joy, but from the inability to say, "I feel bad." Alternative versions, however fantastical they may seem, underscore the main point. People wanted to find meaning. In a society where medicine is powerless, where the authorities are silent, and where reason cannot explain what is happening, any answer is better than no answer at all. By the end of 1962, the laughing epidemic had gradually died down. Outbreaks became less frequent, attacks shorter, and schools began to reopen. Medical commissions recorded the disappearance of symptoms in most of those infected without the use of medication. There was no final act, no single cause, no one to blame. The laughter simply disappeared, just as it had come. But the consequences remained. Many schools that had become hotbeds of the epidemic suffered for a long time from a reputation as cursed. Parents were afraid to send their children there. Some educational institutions were closed permanently. Doctors involved in the investigations were divided in their opinions. Some called it a typical case of psychogenic mass reaction. Others admitted, "We still don't understand what happened." Surprisingly, the epidemic has almost disappeared from public memory. It is not mentioned in Tanzanian history textbooks. Only brief medical reports remain in the archives. Officials tried to forget it as quickly as possible. The epidemic of laughter did not fit into the image of a new, independent, rational African country. It was too strange, too shameful, like a scar on the body that no one talks about. But from time to time, the topic resurfaces. In 2009, British psychologist Robin Murphy published an article in which he called the epidemic in Tanzania one of the most mysterious manifestations of mass psychogenic behavior in the 20th century. His work sparked a wave of interest in scientific and quasi-scientific circles, but soon it disappeared from the agenda. Today, the epidemic is remembered only in rare documents, blogs, and alternative archives. It has become something of an urban myth, only on a national scale. People doubt whether it ever happened at all. Maybe it was exaggerated, or a newspaper hoax. But archives, interviews, and medical reports confirm that it did happen. More than 1,000 people, most of them children, laughed for weeks for no reason. Why does almost no one talk about this story? Perhaps because it is frightening. Because it shows that the human mind is not always subject to logic. Because it reminds us that even without viruses, wars, or disasters, society can collapse under the weight of invisible but palpable pain. Mass hysteria is a mirror of anxiety. Laughter has become a symptom. The laughter epidemic in Tanzania is not just a medical mystery. It is a metaphor, the specter of fear in an age of freedom, a collective cry disguised as laughter. And perhaps it has not been forgotten by accident. Because some epidemics do not die. They just wait for someone to laugh again.